HistoryNet and Mr. Brass are interviewing Mike the Inspirer tonight. How are you doing, Mike?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah.
Tell us about your background, conversion story, all that good stuff.
I thought you were going to say conversion therapy. I was like, what? That's not me. Well, I mean, just to recap, I was just sort of raised in a really fundamentalist church. I hated it. Got picked on there. Got body slammed there once. Horrible experience. A lot of details. But made me hate Christianity. It made me start researching arguments to debunk it. But unfortunately, came across a lot of Jesus mysticists at the time. And I knew their arguments were just bad. And so that made me look at the Christian intellectual side. And eventually I became a Christian slowly through studying that.
Like, were you always a believer, or were you atheist, agnostic at one time?
I probably was never an atheist. The idea, just from like basic understandings of like a contingency or a moral argument, the idea of atheism just never was always just seemed irrational to me. From just, basic moral arguments, basic contingency arguments.
And what led you to conclude that Christianity has the most merit out of all the world religions?
I've studied a lot of the evidence with regards to the resurrection argument in that respect. So I think I was just about when I just finished reading the Quran, and then I started looking for evidence to see if there's anything to support Islam, and didn't really find much other than like, oh my gosh, Muhammad couldn't read, but he wrote this amazing book. And I was like, maybe. I thought the arguments were kind of light. And so someone spurred my interest in some of the arguments for the resurrection and how it was different from like Islam, because it was a public proclamation with public evidence, a public tomb, all these types of things. Whereas Muhammad used to rely on his private visions, same with like Joseph Smith. And so I think I started looking into that, and I thought the arguments were pretty good. I also thought the theology or the philosophy behind God becoming flesh, dwelling among us, being crucified, dying for sins I thought it captured more the needs of humanity. And I thought the combination of the historical evidence for the resurrection, the reliability of the New Testament, plus its philosophical depth really made a strong case for its authenticity. So it was a slow process. It didn't happen overnight, but I slowly became a Christian because of that.
Interesting. What do you think is the best case for the resurrection, and why?
Well, I don't think there's one specific thing that's the best case. It's a cumulative case based on a lot of the evidence points. If all we have are the eyewitnesses of the disciples, it wouldn't be a good case. But it's the eyewitnesses with early evidence in like Clement, Paul, Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny the Younger of persecutions as well happening to the early witnesses. Plus the evidence for the empty tomb, which I think is stronger than a lot of skeptics like to admit. I think that pairing with a lot of the other pieces of evidence really make a strong case. So it's a collective type thing. So when people bring other miracle cases against me, I'll know, well, were they set in a hostile environment? Did they say anything that would have been embarrassing to them? Do they produce any sort of like strong physical evidence, like an empty tomb, these types of things? And you'll notice, even as Anthony Flew admitted, there's not a lot of strong evidence for other miracle claims like what you get with the resurrection.
Right. Yeah. Then they'll also mention other supposed miracle workers like Augustus Caesar and Vespasian and a couple of Jewish scholars around at that time. Forgot their names.
Yeah.
Right. What were you going to say, Brass?
Oh, I was going to say that Christians aren't against the idea that there are some people that, have specific powers. They would just believe that they came from God, I would assume.
Right. One of the things I noted in my resurrection series is if you can, I love when atheists try to debunk the resurrection by trying to argue for other miracles. I'm like, they're just shooting themselves in the foot. Because even if they could show that those miracles happened, Christians are going to go, okay, well, we believe in a supernatural world, so it could have come from powers of darkness or powers of light. It doesn't really support the atheistic conclusions. So it's kind of funny. I debated someone on capturing Christianity, I think 3 years ago, on the resurrection. And that was what he did. He went to like the Salem witch trials or the miracles of Vespasian. And there's problems with those, which I noted in the debate. But I mean, even if he was right, I mean, it's not going to really help his case.
Right. Like, do you hold to biblical inerrancy, or does it depend on the genre?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. Now, I don't. So we when people say that, they immediately get these fundamentalist structures in their head.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, think of like a verse like I think it's like 2 Corinthians 10:4, where Paul talks about the boulder following around Israel in the desert. Now, this is a rabbinic tradition. Basically, the rabbis wondered how Israel was able to drink water in the desert for 40 years. So they invented this idea that the rock that Moses split open followed them around in the desert. Now, that's not in Exodus. That's not in Deuteronomy. It's a later rabbinic tradition. Yet Paul is talking about it. Why? Well, he's using it as sort of like a common known story of the day for theological purposing, sort of like how Jesus taught through make-believe stories known as parables. We obviously don't think there really was a prodigal son. It's just story.
And the Good Samaritan.
So when you look at biblical inerrancy, it obviously doesn't mean everything is literal or every story in the Bible necessarily has to be true. Case in point, Jesus' parables. So I take that approach. I don't think, when Jude references the testament of Moses in his epistle, he literally thinks it actually took place. I think he's just referencing a popular known story for theological purposes. The other point about biblical inerrancy is there are scribal issues that have peeked at the text, and all you have to do is compare the differences between Chronicles and Kings. There are some obviously variant differences. So there are scribal errors. I don't deny that. I'm fine saying that the originals were inerrant. We just don't have them anymore. But I think when people say inerrancy, it draws up all these categories, and I think that they need the qualifiers and what they mean. Doesn't mean everything in the Bible is literal. It also does not mean there cannot be scribal errors. But I think looking at the biblical world as the oral culture that it was, not a written culture, but an oral culture, they were more focused on preserving the message, not necessarily the exact wording. And we need to remember that.
Yeah. I was just like, I was finding it funny how you bring that up with the whole, like the whole fundamentalist worldview, because that does get crept into it. I find like, I remember when you were debating Kent Hovind, that I believe you had brought up that you used to be a young Earth creationist.
Mm-hmm.
What actually got you out of that?
Well, I should probably start with what got me into it. So I had just become a Christian. I was living in Delaware in the military, and I was invited over to a Bible study. And the Bible study was we were going to watch a debate between Michael Shermer and Kent Hovind in California. And Shermer's not the best debater, and Kent Hovind is a very smooth-talking, confident guy. So I thought he might be onto something, and I really kind of dove into his work, and I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting. And then I went on MySpace and tried to debate it. And boy, did that not go well. He lies. He lies about a lot of stuff, and it really affected me when he did that. So luckily, I found Hugh Ross, and that kind of got me out of it for a little while, but I was still kind of unsatisfied with some of the stuff Hugh Ross says. And then eventually I got spurred on to like Michael Heiser and John Walton, J. Richard Middleton. And those guys really, I kind of honed in on it. So it was another gradual thing for me. It was, it took a while. I went through a lot of anger and issues and doubt and fighting. And, it's not something that just happens overnight.
Yeah, I mean, I generally think whenever I talk to young Earth creationists about this, generally it's always becomes a moral problem more than it's about a scientific problem. Like, I believe when you're in your debate with Kent Hovind on that, like, where he basically did bring up and said, like, this is not how God would do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that this, because it requires all this death. And I think that's where a lot of young Earth creationists come from, where it's not really an intellectual problem of accepting evolution, and where it's more of a moral problem.
Yeah. And it's like, why wouldn't he use death? He used death for the atonement of our sins. I mean, he can use death. I mean, he used death throughout Israel, animal death. I mean, you'd think that if animal death was necessarily evil, he wouldn't have had that in the tabernacle when Israel was sacrificing to him.
And you ever had a flat iron steak? Like, animals are meant to taste that good.
I do enjoy steak and whiskey. There's a lot of Ron Swanson in me, I will admit. My wife says my personality is a combination of Deadpool and Ron Swanson. So it gives you a visual. But yeah, I think humans are meant to eat meat. I'm not a fan of the whole vegan idea. Maybe that'll change after the Millennial Kingdom. I don't know. But there's a possibility there. But I think a lot of it not so much is moral issues with evolution. I think it's more emotional problems. I don't like the idea of animals dying. Therefore, it's bad. Okay, well, first we need to step back. Let's put our emotions to the side. I don't like seeing animals die either. I don't. I was invited one time to help process a pig. I wanted to show up after they slaughtered the pig because I didn't want to see it die. I don't like this idea of animals dying, though. But, just because I don't like it, that doesn't mean it's immoral. We have to differentiate between our emotions and what's logical here.
And
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm done.
Like in Genesis, there's this conquer and subdue language when it comes to the creatures of the world.
Yeah, so Joshua John Van E wrote his dissertation on that, and I'll be doing a video. So my video is going to come out this Friday, is on Genesis 1, and then in July I'll do Genesis 1b, and then I'll move on to Genesis 2. So the series I'm working on now is going to be between Genesis 1 and 11, and I'm going to explain the story, Genesis 1 to 11. I'm going to go up through the fall. Why was the tree of knowledge of good and evil even in the garden? Was it even a bad tree? It wasn't a bad tree. People misunderstand that. What's with this talking snake? I'll go over the Nephilim. I'm not going to take a divine interpretation of that, so people might get mad at me for it. I'll do the flood as well, but I'm going to start with Genesis 1, of course, and I'll address a lot of that in July when I explain that, when God said to subdue and rule the earth, those are very harsh Jewish words, very harsh Hebrew words. They refer to like enslavement, conquest. You're not going to do those things in a paradise. If God created everything perfectly with no death, he would not tell his people to go out and perform a conquest and enslavement upon the earth. And also, there's a very interesting thing in Genesis 2. Eve is said to be a helper. Okay, now scholars look at that word and they kind of go scratch their heads and they go, okay, why is this word there? Because so they translate it in a very general way to mean helper. But really that word only shows up in scripture when it's referring to a military sustainer. So Eve is like a military captain. Like she's like supposed to help Adam in his conquest strategies. It's a little bit more harsh than people realize.
Yeah, there's all this war language throughout the entire Old Testament because the Israelites were a warrior culture and they saw God as the divine warrior.
Yeah, and you also have to remember the idea of this paradise view, this utopian view prior to the fall, is not a Mesopotamian idea. It's not a Hebrew idea. It's a Greek idea that we have imported onto the Bible. The Greeks believed in a paradise prior in this ancient golden age. But it's really hard to find that in Genesis. They didn't really believe in this paradisal age, this utopian age. You could argue that within the garden it was a paradise, but that does not apply to the whole earth.
Which was flat.
Yeah, it's obviously flat, obviously.
Yeah, underneath the crystal dome. Surrounded by space water and Leviathan lurking underneath Sheol.
Yeah. Leviathan's definitely
not a cosmic sperm bank.
Yeah. Leviathan's definitely not like a personification of nature. It has to be a real dragon.
Yeah, it's a crocodile.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Behemoth was a dinosaur.
Oh yeah, and totally not No, actually, it was a hippo. And totally not the personification of land creatures.
If you go to the channel Pixels and Papyrus by scholar Ben Stanhope, he's got a video on each of those, and it notes they're basically just personifications of nature, is what their argument is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember what's funny is because there is always this idea that if you say Genesis or if you say really any work is mythology, then you're automatically saying, oh, well, it's completely false.
Yeah.
Well, something can be mythology but have truth in it. Because that's sort of an idea that we've sort of That's actually like I believe it's a 16th century or 17th century idea that came out of Europe or something. I might have been messing up the years, but basically, the idea is that all these religions are just mythologies, and our religion is the one non-mythology, and that was sort of like how we've sort of imported it over. But in reality, like how Anthony Marcanti in his book on the subject, where he basically said a lot of ancient people, what they weren't trying to describe things that they didn't know about. They were just trying to put a concrete image to it.
Right. You can't look at Genesis and read it in scientific terms because they had no sense of science. So if a tree grew, it's because there was a deity making it grow. The reason why trees didn't grow at certain times of the year is because the deity went away. So Tammuz went to the underworld, or, you know, the storm god Baal disappeared for a while, or maybe he died. There's debate about if he ever died or not in the Baal cycle. I'll probably do a video on that eventually, but I need to read a little bit more on that because I'm undecided right now. But so that's kind of how they understood the ancient world. It was everything that happened in nature happened because a deity did something. They didn't have a concept of physics. So if the sun moved in the sky, it's because a deity was literally pulling it. If a tree grew, it's because a deity literally made it grow.
Yep.
Go ahead.
And every day, Ra was battling the chaos monster Apep.
Right. So when you read Genesis, you have to keep that in mind. They're not talking about things in scientific terms because they don't have a concept of science. Now, science sort of came out of a later Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview in the sense that, well, there's only one God, and he sort of set things up according to his words. So these are these sort of laws. They follow his laws, his words. So you get sort of like a natural law out of that. I mean, even more liberal scholars, historians will mention, Christianity was pretty crucial into the modern science. It was crucial to getting to where we are now with their understanding of science.
Mm-hmm.
But the early Hebrews were not writing in this culture that it later sprang out of it. They were writing in their culture. You have to keep that in mind when you're reading the text.
Yeah, like let's get into atrocities in the Old Testament, like slavery issue, for instance, that just will not die. And differences in treatment between Hebrew slaves and non-Hebrew slaves has been pointed out, and all that, as well as so-called genocides. Like, what's normally your response to God's alleged cruelty in the Old Testament?
Okay, well, I do it in three steps. So the first step is to realize it's not a law code. So, you know, there's like Gene Patero, Christine Hayes, Dilbert Hillers have noted. These aren't really law codes. These are more like, as John Walton puts it, they're treatises on judicial wisdom. So we should really treat the Levitical law like we treat Proverbs, as it's sort of like wisdom for the age, how to do certain things. But that doesn't mean you literally have to follow every little thing in there to a T. So, you know, as Dilbert Hillers, you know, kind of notes, you know, the law codes kind of guided courts of the day, but they weren't ever sort of invoked as sort of like the minimal sentences. So you got to really think of them not as like modern law codes, but as sort of like treatises on judicial wisdom. They were trying to teach judges, trying to teach rulers what judicial wisdom was. So keep that in mind. The second thing to remember is the Bible directly tells us in numerous places, or implies in numerous places, that the Levitical law is not perfect. So first you have Matthew 19, where Jesus says, you know, you were given a law of divorce because your hearts were hard. Okay, that tells us God was compromising with Israel at the time. It wasn't what he actually wanted. If you raise a toddler, you will understand. It's never about what you actually want. It's always about compromise.
Well, why does an all-powerful God have to compromise with a bunch of desert sheep herders?
Yeah, because free will. And then another place is 1 Samuel 8, where God says, I don't want to give you a king. That's a bad idea, but I'll let you do it, you know, and gives them a king. Another place is Numbers 27, where these daughters say, hey, our father has no male descendant. Oh, we want an inheritance. And so they go to God and they say, what do you think? And they go, that's a good, you know, oh, that's great. Let's add it into the law. So the law was available to be compromised and updated. So it wasn't perfect. So anyone who realizes it, who tries to argue, how could God give such a horrible law? You need to realize it was a compromise at the time. It wasn't what he actually wanted to do. And he was willing to update and change it over time. And then the third thing is that if you read like Paul Copan, who's written extensively on this, And yes, I know Tom Stark has replied to him, and his reply is not that great.
And Greg Boyd also wrote an entire 2-volume book talking about how God's portrayal in the Old Testament was mostly thanks to the culture of the day.
Yeah. So, I mean, Paul Copan kind of basically explains a lot of these laws are taken out of context, and you're not looking at the full understanding of Leviticus. It's not as harsh as you think it is. Stop assuming slavery in the Old Testament is like the modern antebellum slavery. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Modern antebellum slavery is literally outlawed in Exodus 21:16. You cannot kidnap someone and force them into labor.
Oh, but that's just Hebrew slaves.
Yeah, of course it is. But yeah.
Then they'll point to.
I always put it like this: there was just two types, like, because they like to make a difference between foreign and native, just Israelites slaves, and I just put it like this: there's only two types really. There is slaves that get off at 7 years, and then there's slaves that just there's not a set time frame for them to get off.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing: they'll say, "Well, there's not a set time frame, then therefore they can stay forever." No, it just means like there's not a set, like just because there's not a set time for, let's say, when you're going to pick someone up at the mall, that doesn't mean you're never going to pick them up at the mall.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like goes back to my first point. These are not like modern law codes. They're expressing judicial wisdom, not minimal sentences or minimal terms.
It's like this. It's like if someone said, I'll pick you up, whenever, and they'll say, oh, well, since you didn't set an official date of time, like 2-3 hours from now, I'm just going to assume you mean never. So,
every time you correct them about the slavery, then they'll just point to Digital Hammurabi's videos because he goes all of this in depth, and like he hates it when atheists use his work for their agenda.
Really, I think he's a very smart guy. I do need to watch more stuff, but I just haven't had the time yet. Because he doesn't do a lot on Genesis. He does a little bit here and there. But right now I'm really diving into Genesis, and I'm currently collecting arguments for the reliability of Genesis and trying to argue that it's very early. So I'm going through, I'm collecting a bunch of arguments, and hopefully I'll put all those in one video. As I'm going through my series on Genesis 1 through 11, though, that's how I'm collecting them. I'm getting them all gathered up.
Yeah. Like your channel has high quality content for YouTube. Like, how do you feel that these sucky new atheist channels are getting bigger as well as flat earther channels?
It is what it is. I'm not going to worry about it. My goal was never to get big. I swear to God, but before I uploaded my first video, I never thought I'd get 1,000 subscribers. I never thought I'd get that big. Okay, so to me, 1,000 was big at the time. So I don't really care about that kind of stuff. Because as Paul says in the Gospel of Philippians, like, what do I care that other people misuse Christ? They're still preaching Christ. I have to focus on what I'm doing. So that's what I just focus on. I focus on what I have, my tasks are, and I just kind of go from there. And I'm not going to worry about how big other channels are.
Right. Tell us about your study into the soul and the afterlife. And you mentioned you're planning to redo your Case for the Soul series in the near future.
Not redo, update. I wanted to add more evidence, deal with more objections, that kind of stuff. Some of my older videos, I definitely talk too fast in them, and I want to try to redo them and slow down a little bit. So, but like there's one piece of evidence where there have been studies with psilocybin and other LSD-related drugs. So it was predicted by physicalists that when you give someone these drugs, you should see increased brain activity because everything's just happening in the brain. This was predicted. Very important. Remember that. It was predicted by the physicalist paradigm that if you give someone these drugs, you should see increased brain activity. Well, the studies shocked a lot of researchers because it didn't increase brain activity. Brain activity decreased sometimes upwards of 50%. So if these, but you should see increased brain activity because people are having very psychedelic experiences. Blood flow is increasing because people get, sometimes get excited or get anxiety during these types of experiences. So you have increased blood flow, but the brain activity goes down. Why? Well, maybe because not everything is actually happening in the brain like physicalists assume. So I want to do that. I'm going to first I want to read a book called Irreducible Mind, which is, I've read 2 chapters out of it on my computer, but I'm going to get a hard copy so I can read it all because I don't like reading on the computer too long. But I want to go through that book and fact check it and check some of their sources out because there's some pretty good arguments I've seen in there.
Then there's also the 2 brain hemisphere argument where one guy was a Christian and then he got hit on the head or something. The other part of it, half of his brain, is an atheist.
It split brain personalities. I actually addressed that in the series already. That one case is one case study, and it's really hard to draw a conclusion from one case study. If you look at social scientists, they get kind of annoyed when you try to make arguments from case studies because you got to really have higher sample sizes and multiple studies going on. So just because there's one case study, it's really hard to draw a conclusion from that, let alone what was actually happening in the brain.
And that argument, at best, would just show that atheism results from brain damage.
That's cruel. I'll let it pass, though.
If we're going to we're going to use that argument.
Well, I mean, I'll be debating Aaron Ra this month, and he makes a lot of those types of claims. So,
oh yeah.
In the other way.
Yeah, that's actually one of my questions. I was listening to you on JMD, and you said something about how you have a match with Aaron Ra.
Yeah.
And like this is in public place, I assume, right?
Yeah, I'll be live in Dallas. So I already got my plane ticket. I'll be flying to Dallas. It's June 23rd in Fort Worth at a place called World of Beer. It's hosted by the Bible and Beer Consultorium. So that's why it's at World of Beer. But yeah, we'll be debating on, is Christianity dangerous? And I cannot wait.
Oh yeah, I was saying, you said in the past that you've watched Aaron Ra's videos. Are you buckling down with doing that? And
am I what?
In the debate with him? Or are you doing more of that now since you're going to be debating him?
Oh yeah. Well, I'm also reading a lot of studies right now because I've seen a lot of the claims he makes, and so I'm going to try to read up and get prepared for some of the arguments he could make. But I can't believe he even agreed to the topic. I would not agree to a topic where someone has said, "Do you want to debate is atheism dangerous?" But he agreed to it, so let's see if he's going to make the positive claim. So the burden's going to be on him.
Odds are that he's going to stick to the same script, and his shallow, mindless followers are going to declare victory for him, no matter what you say.
Yeah, look, let's remember something. When I debated Tom Jump, if you go to Tom Jump's channel and you read the comments, some declare victory for him. When I debated Godless Engineer, some declared victory for him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I really don't give a lot of weight to popular opinion.
Even though you objectively won that debate against Godless Engineer and Dillahunty.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they didn't really bring a lot of good research. I mean, to be fair to Godless Engineer, he at least studied up on my videos prior to the debate and was trying to prepare for me. The problem is that he posted my New Testament series on his Twitter feed. So I knew he was going to use that. And then earlier in the week before the debate, he did a whole live stream on Tacitus and the arguments he has against the passage in Tacitus. So I knew his arguments ahead of time. I knew what he thought my arguments were going to be ahead of time. So I just prepared accordingly.
I like when you really get under materialist skin, and a lot of these big atheist YouTubers do responses to you, and you don't do a response video back. You just do it on your blog.
I don't have the time.
I know. I like that. You just go straight to your blog and do it. Like when Godless Engineer responded to you, when Rationality Rolls, and that low-rent dark matter who calls himself Prophet of Zod, and Anti-Citizen X.
Prophet of Zod was really mad about my response, man.
He's got deep psychological issues.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't mean my responses to be personal. I just recently responded to Jackson Wheat. I actually like Jackson. I think he's a great guy. But I mean, I thought his response was a little too harsh, and I had to write a response to that. If he wouldn't have spent so much time on the Edward Oakes quote, I probably wouldn't have even written a response. But I really feel like he kind of went a little low on that. But I think he's a great guy regardless. I'm going to be on his channel this Saturday to talk with him more about structuralism, and we're going to argue kind of back and forth the case for both. That's a complicated issue. I should probably read up before I go on there because he's a smart guy. So I'll need to look at some things.
Yeah, he's a friend of ours. Like I'm sure by now you see Christ mythers as being on par with young Earth creationism. Like, tell us your story in dealing with these guys.
With young Earth creationists or Christ mythers?
Both.
Oh, I don't. So I go back and forth between which is worse. Sometimes it's young Earth creationists because, boy, I totally understand what atheists get annoyed with just hearing someone say, well, the Bible says it, therefore. I'm like, no. Like the one young Earth creationist argument I hate is when say, like you're not, like they argue that, like they equate their interpretation with scripture. And if you reject their interpretation, you're rejecting the word of God. Like, I just want to just say, F off. Like, seriously, you're so full of yourself that you think your interpretation is equated with God's word. At least the opponents of Galileo in their own letters recognized, they said, look, if we're wrong, it just means our interpretation is wrong. Okay, props to them for at least admitting that. I mean, young earthers can't even admit that. They have to say, no, that their interpretation is literally the word of God. It's absurd. And if my interpretation is wrong, I accept that. I don't equate it with literally the word of God, or I try not to. But then Jesus mysticists are just, I think a lot of it's on from both groups. A lot of it's Dunning-Kruger effect. They just know, they think they're so right, yet they know so little. It's really annoying. But I don't know. I can probably deal with Jesus mysticists a little bit better because it's not my side. At the end of the day, I can sort of just laugh at them. Okay, you silly mysticists. But when I see Christians being stupid, it really just sort of like unleashes something primal in me, and I'm like, stop making our side look dumb.
Absolutely. And with Christ mythers.
Yeah.
I was figuring this is going to be a.
That.
Oh, all right.
Okay, go ahead, Brass.
Oh yeah. Well, basically, this seems to be like, I've noticed this keeps going up more and more and more. I've seen Shannon Q. I've seen many atheists just buckle down on it. Where they bring on this. Well, basically, they're really going after Christians on the whole LGBTQ agenda, like with gay people.
Oh.
And like where basically where they're using like gay people. I feel like they're using like the LGBTQ people as a sort of way of saying, oh, look, Christians are horrible. Do you plan on, like, since that is sort of a big topic that I think even Christians, you could admit Christians and atheists don't really know as much on, do you think you're going to make a video on that in the future?
I don't know about that specifically because I try not to attack people. I would rather attack arguments. But when atheists make arguments that Christians are horrible, what Christians need to do is we need to own it. Yeah, we are horrible. Our Bible says we are horrible. We are depraved. We are selfish. We are prideful. So we're not going to do everything right. I don't agree a lot of what some Christians have done to the LGBT community. I don't think they've been loving in a lot of ways. I think it results more from a taboo, more so than maybe just not agreeing theologically, because that's a deep issue in and of itself. But, we could be better. I think what Christians need to admit is we could be better. We admit we are bad. We admit we have failed in a lot of ways, a lot of ways. And if we can own that, that's going to look far better because it's the truth and it's going to cause more humility among us.
Well, yeah, I remember because I recently had to help out Shannon Q and a bunch of her friends because I had heard about like there's these group of churches that they went around. They said something about how they want gays they want homosexuality to be punished by the law and get capital punishment for it.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
I would like, it's like if those people ever got power, I would take up arms. It's like, that is wholeheartedly absurd. Look, I think adultery is immoral. I don't want it to be outlawed. Like you can think something is immoral and should still not be illegal. Like and so I think a lot of people have a problem differentiating that. Just because something you think is wrong does not necessarily mean it should be outlawed. So realize what's kind of going on there.
Well, I think much of the new atheist community also has a hard time distinguishing that too.
Comrade Dimitri has joined us.
Oh, hey. I was wondering.
And, yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't feeling well at first, so.
One question I also wanted to get into, I told you about this on the messenger, where I would like you to know, tell us about a little bit about objective idealism, like how you arrived at your belief in it. And are there any misconceptions that you've noticed that get brought up about it?
Sure. So, what people tend to think of, they think of like Berkeleyan idealism, which is more like a subjective form of idealism. And so, my beliefs in idealism stem basically from understanding the science and quantum mechanics and cosmology, and also structuralist evolution. So, basically, if I could simplify this, see, I probably shouldn't. I should probably do a whole series on idealism itself, and cover a lot of these things, because I want to cover some objections to idealism as well. But I could cover this as well. But basically, if you think about it, is like, I agree there is a world beyond me, an objective world we discover. But I think it's mainly just mental information. It's a larger mental construct that we're discovering. Therefore, it's idealistic, but it's not subjective idealism, because I accept there's a world beyond me that we're discovering. So that's the simplest way I can put it. Subjective idealists are more sort of like, well, our understanding of the world beyond us is just sort of like this subjective construct we as a human race have sort of put together, but we can't really know what's beyond us. So think of like, Kant, for example, or you think of like Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley. Though they're more subjective idealists, whereas like an objective idealist is like, the physical world sure is not really there as we see it. It's just like an emergent construct, but it's still something that we can objectively discover the ontology about. So that's just the simplest way I think I can put it.
I'm sorry, like whenever I hear the word construct, because liberals have really ruined that word for me.
Social construct.
Because everything apparently now is a social construct. So it's sort of like spectrum. So both those words sort of just give me a migraine nowadays.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are two genders. That's as political as I'll get.
Politically incorrect.
There's 72 genders.
72, okay. I want to be 10 of them. Can I be 10 genders at once?
Sure. And I can't tell you can't be, because that would be sexist.
You can even walk into a girl's bathroom, and when they look at you funny, just say, I identify as woman.
Yeah. I just want to say there are a lot of liberals that do attack this idea, so I don't want to just say it's like, oh, those bad, evil liberals. There are plenty of liberals who go, we're not like those liberals. So
yeah.
I think one thing that I keep in mind for people that are really worried about politics is, remember Lord of the Rings. Remember what happens at the end. It's not so much that good won, it's that evil destroyed itself. So Frodo failed. He didn't throw the ring in, but evil still destroyed itself because, Gollum showed up and fell into the volcano regardless. And that's one of the deep philosophical points Tolkien is trying to get to teach us. It's not so much that good always triumphs, it's that evil will always collapse in on itself and kill itself. I think a lot of what's going on in politics now with this insanity from the postmodernists will eventually collapse in on itself and kill itself. I don't think we need to worry too much about it. We just need to keep, pointing to the gospel, pointing the truth, and watch it take its role. Watch it take its path.
That Tolkien idea is also espoused in Star Wars. The Sith always betray each other.
Yeah.
So since you just got here, Comrade Dimitri, do you want to ask Mike anything?
I can't think of anything right now.
Remember, I think you had some more questions, didn't you, Blanco, right?
Oh yeah, the other half of the question was like, what's your experience dealing with nutty Christ-mythers?
Oh yeah, it's just they're pretty crazy. You'll give them evidence and they'll just kind of ignore it. So just go back on Capturing Christianity from about a month ago, and I debated David Fitzgerald. Yeah. And it's like he just every time I tried to talk, he'd be like, time out. I'm like, can I get a sentence out? And I had some stuff I wanted to give him. I was like, hey, here's a really interesting quote from Dale Allison. Let's talk about this. Couldn't even get there with him because time out. And yeah, really just unfortunately for someone who's claimed he's done this for 18 years, really poor research in his books. Doesn't even realize some of his own sources don't agree with him.
Well,
he said in that debate that someone named Petra Pakkanen said Christianity was a mystery religion. I went and looked in that book after the debate. She doesn't say that.
Well,
So, I don't know where he's getting this idea from.
Have you ever watched his documentary, the God Who Wasn't There?
I think it was from some other guy. The God Who Wasn't There. That was his documentary.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. I don't remember his name.
The one that started.
Ryan Fleming. That was the guy.
The one that
That
introduced
sounds like a
us.
movie that DC would make.
That documentary that introduced Carrier to the world.
Oh yeah.
Like, you know, Richard Cosmic Sperm Bank Carrier.
I love that Tim O'Neill says that when he wants to explain how crazy mysticists are, he immediately goes to that argument. Like, let me just tell you Carrier's argument about the sperm bank. That's how bad these arguments are.
Oh, love me some Tim.
Well, it's his argument, so I mean, you know, who's making the arguments? It's Richard Carrier himself.
So, yeah, that guy who created the documentary, he was asked to debate by multiple Christians, and he turned them all down with like these really weird guidelines and restrictions that were you would basically have to accept he was right, and it was wholeheartedly absurd.
Jeez.
There's a new mythicist documentary coming out called Jesus versus Batman. Like, you know, those asinine Spider-Man quotes about
Yeah.
But they're gonna use that on him, and like hypothesize if and we're in a post-apocalyptic society and civilization revitalizes itself, there's going to be a church to Batman or something like that. Spider-Man.
Well, all right. Let's see if they could. I mean, like, you know, we can deal in hypotheticals all day. I mean, but yeah, it's absurd. It's hard to reason with a lot of these people if that's their argument, and yet Price uses that argument all the time. Like Robert Price, who is probably the smartest mysticist out there.
Yeah, he's the only mythicist who's an actual Bible scholar.
Yeah, he's the smartest mysticist out there, and even his arguments are not that good. If you get a chance, read the book 5 Views of Jesus, and Robert Price goes first, and then all the 4 other scholars get a chance to respond. And I just love reading their responses to Robert Price. Like, where is that book? I got it here somewhere. But, oh, yeah, here it is. But, like, who is it? It's, Luke Timothy Johnson, just sort of, like, so shocked that he even has to respond to this. It's so bad.
I mean, and also what I like about Robert Price is that while he is a mythicist and stuff, he's actually probably one of the nicest ones you'll ever meet.
He's extremely nice, but I mean...
He's only...
Because he's one of the few mythicists that's not going into it just so he can burn the Christian religion to the ground.
Yeah, it's just, but some of his arguments are just really not that good, unfortunately. Like he argues Christianity is a mystery cult, and he relies on a lot of scholarship that's 100 years old for that. This is one of the things I discovered was reading David Fitzgerald's books. It's like, look, William Bowswit was probably a very intelligent guy, but I mean, like, there have been scholars that have come along since him, like Glenn Bowersock or Jan Bremer, who have made far better arguments and have responded to a lot of those. Can you go to them? No, okay, but no, it's James G. Dunn, and his response to Robert Price is, "Gosh, so there are still serious scholars who put forward this view that the whole account of Jesus' doings and teachings are later myths." He's just so shocked by it.
Okay, let's read from the live chat for a while. Let's see. Big Boy says, currently questionable if Paul existed.
What?
Paul mythicist.
Yeah. Even Carrier doesn't say that. Even Carrier will not say that Paul didn't exist because we have Paul's own letters. You would have to say that all of Paul's letters are forged. And I love when people try that because it's like, how do you know they're all forged? What do you compare them against? Like you should got to compare them against a real Paul. That's why some people argue that like Timothy and the letters of Timothy and Titus are not really Paul because they don't sound like the other letters of Paul. You have something to compare them against. How do you do that if all of the letters are forged?
Well, did Shakespeare really write his plays?
Yes, C.S. Lewis also wrote the Chronicles of Narnia and his other books.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. It's if you were to read my text between me and my brother, it sounds nothing like who I am on my channel. So does that mean my texts are forged? I mean, depending on who you're talking to, it can be different.
And when you see Carrier speak on stage and then you read his blogs, like they're like it's like two totally different people.
Yeah, same thing with like Abraham Lincoln.
I probably could never debate Carrier because I'm worried I would say something that would make him want to sue me. I'm really skeptical debating people that are on sue crazes because I also have like this primal instinct in me against women who, or against men who, well, I shouldn't say too much about his personal life, but reading stuff that he did in his personal life really just kind of like it brought out like this primal, like protective male anger in me that just was like, how dare you? It's really, I don't know if I could ever debate him just because of that. It would bother me too much.
Because of his polyamory.
Yeah, and then he'll show his adultery and all that, and then he'll after he debates somebody, he'll talk shit about them on his blog, or if anybody criticizes anything about him, he'll just go on a rage tangent.
Yeah. Hold on, someone asked a very important question in the live chat. What is your favorite whiskey, IP? Oh, that's a good question. Right now, it might be either Oban or Talisker, but I also have a really cool Black Bull Scotch I like. It's very interesting.
Big Boy says you need to define miracles and powers. Both don't seem.
I have a whole video on miracles called "Are Miracles Even Possible?" And in there, I rigorously define it.
And everything in the gospel.
It's simple to define it. Just look up the definition for magic and just put that in.
Yeah, exactly.
And everything in the gospel seems like parables or fables, even though it's the consensus that they're in the genre of Greco-Roman biography.
Even though they mentioned Pilate, is Pilate a fable?
You'd be surprised. I'm not like, because I remember I've had some mythicists deny that Tacitus and Josephus existed simply because for the entire reason of just not wanting Jesus to exist.
Well, it's like, okay,
That's
where do
impressive.
they draw the line
That
here?
is, you got to give their hats off to the loops they got to jump through to get to those types of conclusions.
And I also asked them what other issues they have with Josephus and Tacitus, and they never tell you.
Oh yeah, they'll never. I know.
They say that it supposedly went through Christian scribes, but I don't know. Their claim is that it supposedly went through Christian scribes, therefore it makes it dirty.
Just about every reference to a human Jesus has to be explained away as an interpolation or explained away in some convoluted manner. Every single one. I know.
Until you can show me a scholar that is specialized in Tacitus that doubts Annals 1544 is authentic, it's going to be a joke of an argument to argue that the passage in Tacitus was forged.
Like Eric asks, what would y'all do if you found out your girlfriend/wife became a young Earth creationist?
Wonder what she was smoking because she doesn't care about any of that.
Divorce.
Alimony check. Yeah, let's see what else. Before I have to Adam Tippett says, I have to admit that Walton's idea of the cosmic temple is difficult to accept. Probably talking about Genesis.
Yeah, so my video is currently up live on my Patreon channel right now for all my Patreon supporters. Kind of covers a lot of that. So that will be live later this week for anyone who doesn't want to see it early. I'll cover a lot of his arguments, and I'll present a lot of my own as well. So some of the arguments, like my final closing argument, is from a passage in Jeremiah, and this is like my go-to passage to argue that Genesis is not about material creation. But you won't really find that in Walton. It's something that I've kind of discovered from other scholars or from reading myself. But I'll present a lot of the arguments as to why it is a cosmic temple and why it's not about material creation. So my series right now is on Genesis 1, then Genesis 2. I'll deal with the whole issue of dust and rib and, what is this a separate creation account, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then Genesis 3 will be exciting because I'm going to deal with the serpent. I'm going to do that in 2 videos probably. First is with the serpent, and then I'll do Adam and Eve in the fall. And I'm going to argue that the tree of knowledge of good and evil wasn't an evil tree. It wasn't bad. It was how Adam and Eve went about obtaining wisdom from it. They didn't wait for permission, or they seize it. Of course, I'll do that as well. And then
another thing that would be interesting to.
Well, yeah, I mean, another thing that people don't consider is that the title of the tree itself, the tree of good and the tree of knowledge, like that, it's a Miraism, you can say, Miraz, or what you can say, and it's basically when you like two extremes, like good and evil, and what they're just simply saying is that they wanted all knowledge.
Yeah, I don't think that's really what the tree gave them, though. So basically, I go to like 1 Kings 3, where Solomon asked for wisdom to discern between knowledge of good and evil. That's what he asked for from God, and God grants it to him. Now, that doesn't mean Solomon didn't know what knowledge of good and evil was prior to this. It doesn't mean that he became omniscient after. It just means he got better insight. He just got a little wiser. And I think that's exactly what the tree did. It didn't, they didn't know they knew what knowledge of good and evil was prior to taking of the fruit. But it just gave them deeper and better insight, like what Solomon was granted.
Same can't be said for David, who sent his best friend off the war so he could have his wife.
Yeah, that if you get a chance, there's a great book. I've referenced it before. It's called Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes, and here it is. They have a whole chapter in this book about the Bathsheba and David incidents. I believe it's a chapter on honor and shame. And it's really interesting because they argue that basically Uriah knew about the affair the whole time, and he was actually saying things to David to sort of shame him for it all. So it's actually really interesting to read.
Well, yeah, I mean, and here's what's funny is like, yeah, thank you for getting onto that, because there is this big misconception that I have noticed from them, because they'll generally do this, like atheists I'll find, and some Muslims and stuff, they'll use this where they'll find some flaw that an Old Testament character had. Well, they'll say like Noah got drunk, or they'll say Moses, killed a man in the desert, or something like that.
And Abraham almost sacrificed his son. They would imply that he would do it without question. He was ecstatic about it. Like, I'm going to sacrifice my son.
Well, I mean, no. Here's the thing: is like they'll use all these, and they'll say, well, these men aren't men of God. They're not perfect. I said, what? List me one time in the entire Hebrew Bible that it ever said that these prophets were supposed to be perfect human beings.
Well, it did say that Abraham was a friend of God and David was after God's own heart.
Well, yeah. But that still doesn't mean like they were like Moses and all of them knew that they weren't perfectly moral beings.
Yeah.
That's why they acknowledged their sins to God. They knew that they weren't perfectly moral beings. That's sort of the entire point of the Old Testament.
Moses flat out told God he wasn't qualified for the job.
Yeah, so
that's also the point of Noah getting drunk. The whole that's part of the story. The point is that the flood was supposed to get rid of sin, but Noah was still sinful. Look, sin is still continuing even though that the flood happened. It's part of the whole story, and when I get to that, I'll explain. That's actually supposed to parallel Adam's fall. Noah getting drunk. It's connected to fruit as well.
Yep, and the flood was supposed to be a cosmic do-over.
Kind of. It was supposed to eradicate because humanity was getting far too out. There is also some interesting genetic evidence that came out with regards to that are about, like, I believe it was like 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, there was a genetic bottleneck, and they attribute it to so much violence or war happening among ancient cultures. There was like one man for every 17 women. So when Genesis says that violence was on the face of the earth, that might correlate to what we see in the genetic data.
Well, I mean, that sounds pretty good. One man for every 17 women.
You're horrible. You don't have a wife. No, that's not a good idea.
That's brass humor. Text 7 says, question from Mike. Why does Jesus say he can't do anything by himself in John 5:30?
Sure. Yeah, that has to relate to the Trinity and what we understand with regards to it. So the Son is eternally begotten of the Father. So his power is dwelled within Autos Theos, the Father himself. He is eternally begotten, just like the Holy Spirit proceeds eternally from the Father. Their source is the Father. So check out my video, What is the Trinity? I sort of explain the details of the Trinity there. It's like 3 minutes long, and I kind of go over that. But that correlates right into that idea.
Raphael Krieger says, hey guys, God bless you. P.S. Jesus Christ, HistoryNet and IP together. Now I can die happily. Why, thank you.
Thank you.
Salem Coupe says, ask IP if he can bring Ben Stanhope on it for an interview.
Yes, we're planning on it. So he's supposed to come out with a book. And when his book comes out, he's going to come on my channel. And we're going to talk about it to help promote the book because he's brilliant in and of itself. He's helping me with my Genesis series already. So just remember, you know, he helped me write the video on Genesis 3. So yeah, he's great. And when his book comes out, he'll be on my channel.
Melissa Mitchell asks, in what context is owning another human being as property considered moral?
When the human being agrees to it. And again, they didn't really have a concept of property. I mean, they say numerous times in Levitical law that God owns the land. What they owned was the output of the land. So think of that in terms of people as well. They didn't own the people. They owned the output of the people, the work. It was about paying off debts or getting work out of people. My employer doesn't own me. He owns my output, and then he pays me for it. Same kind of concepts.
And everybody was a slave to somebody. Even the king had to answer to God.
Yeah, and David is called a slave to the Philistines when he was a mercenary for them. He uses the same word to refer to them. So you got to think about that kind of context with regards to the word that's described in Exodus.
It's always funny to think about that because, like, I went to the Ty and Dale commentary series, and I can really, like, whenever I get into numbers and all that stuff, you can never really hear nothing but about pretty good stuff about, like, the atheists will typically always bring up the whole, you know, you can beat your rod. I mean, you can beat your slave with a rod, and as long as he doesn't die, you're fine.
And reading sex slavery into Numbers 31.
Yeah, so if you read Paul Copan's book, Did God Command Genocide? He basically points out God never commanded Numbers 31. That was Moses acting on his own accord.
Well, yeah, and I mean, here's what's funny is, like, someone will say, like, they have this stupid argument. They'll say, well, what else would they would do with virgins? I'm like, you didn't read the entire story, did you? Like, the reason why they didn't kill the virgins was because they were the only people that could not have possibly had done the crime.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't about wanting something from them. It was about justice.
Yeah.
Like,
and they'll bitch and moan about owning the women and their kids will be born into slavery and inherited onto your children and all that.
Well, yeah, and it's sort of like they have this bad memory and stuff. Like, I remember they use this whole loophole argument, they'll say, where, like, you can keep a Hebrew, like, slave forever as long as you give him a wife or something. And they said, you didn't read the entire thing, right? It says right in there, like, if he comes to love his master and his wife. So you're not dealing with a guy that's being blackmailed into into being a slave forever. You're dealing with a guy who's genuinely come to love the people he's worked for.
They love slavery in the Bible, I gotta tell you. Adam Tippett says, I honestly think that the Garden of Eden idea is definitely an ancient Near Eastern thing, so I agree with Walton when he mentions that in his book Genesis 1.
Yeah, I mean, there's garden motifs in a lot of ancient works. However, the geography of Eden is unique to Genesis, and that is actually, as I did in my recent video on Eden that we've sort of found that location. So it sort of fits with the description underneath the Persian Gulf. So I think that actually shows Genesis is a little bit more reliable than a lot of these other ancient Near Eastern works. And there's other arguments I want to give with regards to that as well. So I'm building up a collection of arguments for the reliability of Genesis.
That's also another thing you can bring up in your videos, that the myriad of cultures throughout the world have this concept of a fallen paradise, a flood, a serpentine divine being that stole immortality from man, a tree of life, and all that stuff.
It depends. It depends on really what you're looking at. I mean, you don't see a lot of that in like Egyptian ideas. And then of course it's different depending on where you go. So it's much more complicated when you really look at it. And we also have to be careful because some of them have been misinterpreted by missionaries that went to China or places like in Africa. So we have to keep that in mind as well. But with regards to in the Middle East, there are a lot of garden motifs, but Genesis seems to be quite unique in that it tries to geographically place it and basically gets an actual area that did exist.
The memory of a first man and woman is also present. Yeah,
that's present in a lot as well. But you kind of would expect it. I mean, it's not really in Greek mythology, though, if I remember correctly. They believe there was a pair after the flood, but the Greek mythology pair after the flood created humans by taking stones and throwing them over their shoulders, and whatever stone hit the ground became a human. So they repopulated the earth by stoning. But they got stoned.
Like Greek mythology, it all depends on which source you really get it from, because you got that story and you get it where Hephaestus basically makes them. And so, I mean, and you have some words, I believe Zeus makes humans. So it really depends on the source you got. They weren't really consistent with that.
Yeah.
Like Egypt also has different creation stories. One you have Ra being the creator, and another one you have Ptah being the creator, and then there's one with Amun being the creator.
Right. Those might be blending of earlier cultures because Egypt wasn't, originally a unified kingdom. That happened really during the Old Kingdom. So that's a possibility. But I would also argue, one of the arguments I'm going to make is that I think Genesis is far less developed than a lot of other cultures are. So, for example, in Mesopotamia, they attribute civilization to these divine beings called Apkallu. But if you read Genesis, it's not as convoluted. They just attribute it to humans spreading out after Cain fell. Humans were creating civilization. So it seems like it's far less developed in their theology.
Yeah, and presenting them in a more Prometheus-like view. With the Watchers and all that. Bringing civilization to humans.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Let's see. What else we have? Adam Tippett says, I agree with Walton and a couple of other scholars that the Torah should not be translated as law, but rather instructions.
Yeah.
Raphael Krieger says, poor Aaron Ra. Rip.
Yeah. I mean, I'm preparing for him to be super intelligent. Because I don't want to underestimate him. I'm expecting him to do a lot of research before, and then I won't be disappointed. So I have read.
He is intelligent when it comes to biology, but you don't contest that. But he is evidently beyond clueless when it comes to history and philosophy. So you don't got to worry about that.
He is very clueless when it comes to the alleged pagan origins with regards to Jesus. He still cites that ridiculous notion that Jesus is somehow connected to Dionysius because some guy named Achilles Tatius in the 2nd century AD wrote about Dionysius turning water into wine. Okay, if you read scholars like, I don't know, Glenn Bowersock, his book called History is Fiction, he argues that Tatius got that from the Christians. He got it from taking stuff from the Gospel of Luke or the Gospel of John and recycling some of that stuff. And I was going to bring that up in my debate with David Fitzgerald if there were not so many timeouts. There's
Horus, Krishna, Mithra, Attis, and Dionysius, and all that.
I mean, the ones that someone like Robert Price are going to use are going to be like Baal, Adonis, Osiris, Inanna,
Romulus.
Romulus is a really bad one because he doesn't die. He dies in one legend.
Zalmoxis.
Zalmoxis is the worst. It doesn't.
There's also Nosborough.
Romulus only dies in one legend, and that's Dionysus, the guy of Dionysus' writing. And Dionysus doesn't think he's very skeptical, so he thinks he just died.
Talking about Dionysius, the writer, not the
writer, not the god. No, But Livy, of course, thinks he was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. So maybe Romulus was copied from the Book of Kings with regards to Elijah.
Isn't
that logic?
Isn't Zalmoxis the Romanian god?
Yeah. Romulus and Remus are also rebadged from the Proto-Indo-European tale of two brothers. Kind of like a Cain and Abel kind of story.
Maybe there's disagreement. So even when it comes to like a god like Adonis, so I just read Mettinger's book, Riddle of Resurrection, and even he's a little hesitant to say that Adonis is connected to Tammuz. It's possible, but sometimes there's just repeated ideas just sort of happen, and we as humans want to create parallels there that may not even really exist. So like he kind of does this in his book Undying and Rising Gods. Is that like we really want to make a category that says Cyrus and Baal and Adonis and Tammuz were all dying and rising gods, but really that's not the case. They all had their own meanings within their own cultures, and to say they're all in one category is absurd.
And Ishtar in them.
Yeah, I mean he covers Melkart, Baal, Tammuz, Adonis, Osiris, and a god named Eshmun, who he's very a lot of data
on. Union Daraja says existence is the time expressed by light. I think so. I am the Union Daraja. So never mind. He's just being shilling his own site. Adam Tippett says Aaron Ra is painful. Haha. Tried watching him and oh dear.
Yeah, he's quite passionate, and therefore he comes across kind of rude. So that's why I would be very hesitant to be in a discussion with him, because he's got to jump in and interrupt a lot. But the debate I'm having with him is more formal and structured.
Well, RCA couldn't even have a civil, rational discourse with him because he's bitching and moaning the whole time.
I know. Yeah, it's same with Robert Rowe when he debated him. Yeah.
And writer John Buck says Christianity is dangerous because the Salem witch trials. You should paraphrase them. And Cameron Gilchrist says, "Don't forget the Crusades, John."
Are they saying? Are they joking? Or
yeah, they're joking.
Okay.
Huh?
Yeah, and I did like an entire series on like the Crusades and the Dark Ages. So yeah, I'm pretty well prepared on this stuff. And the
That reminds me.
I read the whole book finally. It was called Galileo Goes to Jail and Other Myths. I read chapters out of it, but I finally sat down and read the whole thing. A very great book. They cover a lot of those alleged myths with regards to that.
I also recommend reading The New Atheist Denial of History by Boredom Painter. It's an excellent book.
That's a good book.
Yeah.
Huh? What were you saying?
I was going to say Boredom Painter debunks all the classical atheist myths about history in that one book, so I highly recommend that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's funny is like when people like with the Salem witch, maybe I will think about making a video on that, but like what people fail to realize is that there was a lot more going on at the time than just Christianity. Like, I mean, you can say that about anything really, but like, for example, a big reason why there was such a commotion was because there was a politics because they didn't like the new mayor or something, like the new priest that was just coming in, and they didn't like the rules that he was setting up, and so that led to a big commotion. And eventually, like the big witch craze came in there, and when you give people unlimited power to accuse anyone, guess what? People will abuse that.
Mm-hmm.
Include that in your Enlightenment series if you ever get to that.
Yeah, I'll eventually get to that. I got it on my list.
Saint Dragon says LGBTQIASAOIHRWABOURWEHIOIA plus.
It's really sexist of him and racist to leave out, the other 3,000 genders in that.
Oh yeah. Cameron Gilchrist says traditional Christian morality is immoral according to Shannon Q. Yeah, loving your enemy sure is immoral, isn't it?
I've not talked to her on that topic, but her and I got along when I was on her channel, so I don't have anything bad to say about her.
That's just what he says.
Oh.
I don't know if it's true or not, but see if there's other questions.
Well, I mean, JQ is the one that says that morality is subjective, so I can just say I disagree. It's just as valid.
So I probably should get off pretty soon, just so you know. So if there's any more questions, we can go over them, and then I got to take off.
Okay. Let's see. Tech7 says, another question for IP. Do you consider Jesus' existence to be historical certainty? Obviously.
Well, I mean, I'm 99% probable Jesus existed. Just like I'm like 95% sure Jesus resurrected. I hate putting numbers on them, but because everyone tries to use Bayes' theorem with that, it's just ridiculously wrong. But yeah, I'm very, very certain that yes, Jesus existed and did rise from the dead.
Salem Coupe follows up with that. The funny thing is that most mythicists are former Fundy Christians.
Yes, that's very true. They take a lot of the fundamentalist values they have, and they just this is something even Tim O'Neill, who's an atheist, notes, is that they go from one fundamentalist extreme to the other fundamentalist extreme, and that's not a good way to go about this.
That reminds me, do you deal with a lot of history when it comes to apologetics?
IP?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh yeah.
I just asked, do you deal with a lot of history when it comes to apologetics?
Do you deal with a lot of history when it comes to apologetics? He asked.
Yeah, of course. A lot of that. As I said, I'm going through Genesis right now. And I'll be arguing for, a regional flood and all that kind of stuff. So I'm studying a lot of the history with regards to that.
All right. Logos Theos asks, how would you explain demonic possession on idealism?
Well, I don't know. It's a complicated question. I'm not sure how it would actually work. We would first need to understand what a demon actually is in its ontology and, what we necessarily are. I've not really given a lot of thought to that because I don't think it's necessary. I don't really focus a lot on angels and demons so much.
Basically, basically there was a virus in the system, and that's just really what happened.
You could use that analogy.
Fred H says, IP, do you have any degrees? You seem very knowledgeable.
No, I just have a bachelor's degree. Just general stuff. But no, I don't have any. If I go full time, though, I will attend University of Arizona and get my master's in philosophy of science.
Kyle Elander, civilian name 295, asks, what is the best argument against Christianity?
Problem of evil. Kyle knows that. Kyle and I talk all the time.
Kyle who?
Kyle Allender.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember him. I've actually talked to him a lot. He knows me well.
Yeah, Kyle's written blogs for me.
DX Smith asks, where can we turn to for external evidence of the Exodus and Moses? Also, please share thoughts on 1 Timothy 2:1-2. I hear many arguments from atheists on those two topics.
Okay, so Exodus did a podcast on Bridge Laredo about a year and a half ago. So if you Google like Bridge Laredo podcast, inspiring philosophy, you'll get that podcast, and I give some evidence for the Exodus. I take Douglas Petrovich's approach to the Exodus. I think he's got a really good argument. The pharaoh of the Exodus would be Amenhotep II. And there are there's some strange anomalies that happen right in the middle of his reign. Like he all of a sudden signs a peace treaty with his biggest rivals. He stops all conquest into Canaan. There's religious turmoil. He doesn't allow the priesthood of Amun-Ra to continue. He calls for the smashing of all the Egyptian gods. And then there's a city called Avaris, which was probably abandoned during his reign. And they left behind a large grave of lambs and goats. hint, hint, Passover. So there's a lot of anomalies that happened during his reign, and Petrovich does a pretty good job lining it all up. There are other cases for the Exodus. So Stephen Collins argues it happened under Thutmose IV. Not so much convinced by his view. I think it doesn't have as much data there.
You mean
some argue under Thutmose III. That's really hard to do. I would not recommend that at all. Some argue under Amenhotep III. Some argue Akhenaten. Some argue under Ramesses II. I think Amenhotep II is the best approach. But we don't. A lot of our history of the New Kingdom and back is really sort of fragmented. So there's a lot of holes. So there's this idea that we know all of Egyptian history. There's no Exodus. It's just a BS argument, and anyone who makes that claim has not studied Egyptian history. There's a huge debate over how long the co-regency of Akhenaten and his father Amenhotep III was. Some say 10 years. Some say it was 0. Okay, so if we knew all of Egyptian chronology, that would not even be an issue. There's so much we don't know about Egyptian history.
Yeah, we only know like a fourth of it, right?
Maybe. We can't even, I mean, look at like Kenneth Kitchen's chronology versus Donald Redford's chronology.
Yeah, I'm into Egyptian history myself.
It's off by like 2 or 3 decades.
My position on the Exodus is something happened. Like Trojan War level.
Well, just to dismiss the whole idea, because it's absurd. James Hoffmeyer has written extensively on how internal evidence of Exodus has a lot of affinity to Egypt, and that just doesn't come from some guy writing in Babylon during the exile. You have to know things in Egypt during the New Kingdom to get a lot of that stuff right.
And those tyrants at Wikipedia won't let you correct them when they say it's the consensus that Moses didn't exist. I'm like, that's not the consensus at all. It's that most scholars would tell you that there's no way to archaeologically verify the existence of a desert nomad leader, but the traces of cultural memory within the Torah is very probable.
Yeah, especially the Song of Moses, which is in Exodus. I mean, that probably goes back to Moses himself.
Yeah. Pick Up Your Pants Patrol says, IP reminds me of Tony Hawk.
I don't know if that's a compliment or not.
It's probably a compliment.
Okay.
I would take that as an insult. If you played Pro Skater 3.
I've been playing Pro Skater 1 since the 99 when it came out in the Pizza Hut demo. Along with Final Fantasy 8. But, Leonel Huccio asks, have you checked Michael Heiser's work upon the Divine Council worldview in the Old Testament? Obviously, yes.
Yeah, I've read a lot of Heiser. The only view I don't agree with on Heiser is the identification of the Nephilim as giants and being the semi-divine sons of angels. I'll probably do a video on that when I get to Genesis 6. But no, I don't take his view on the Nephilim. But everything else I pretty much agree with Heiser on.
Samuel Park asks, have you guys watched Trent Doherty and T-Jump debate the proper epistemology for religion?
Yeah, Trent did amazing in that.
Okay, Raphael Krieger asks, will IP do a hangout with Christian Prince, Arabian Prophet, in the future?
If he asks me, sure. I don't even know who that is.
I don't know either. Big Boy says Moses' historicity is questionable. I guess.
The Bible's always guilty until proven innocent.
Well, yeah. But yeah. I think we did pretty good. I think IP said he was wanted to leave soon. I know my phone's going dead.
I'm trying to see if there's any more questions. Just let's see.
So yeah, maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and I got to take off.
All right. Kuhn says anti-theism is boring, to say the least.
If you get a chance, watch the debate between Godless Engineer and the Distributus. The Distributus was kind of rude. He interrupted him a lot, but he still had far better arguments.
Tech7 asks, can you scientifically prove Jesus existed?
No. I mean, you can't prove that. You can't scientifically prove that Julius Caesar existed. So who cares?
Kuhn says Aaron Ra is a meme.
Yeah, someone sent me a meme of him. They went to the old Disney movie Pocahontas and took like Governor Ratcliffe out, and like he does really look like Aaron Ra. It's kind of funny.
A mixture of him and Jafar.
Yeah, but Ratcliffe like really is like, whoo, that's cartoon version of Aaron Ra. It's really kind of hysterical.
Whenever you guys whenever you do the debate, maybe just talk to one of the guys behind the scene and see if they can get General Radcliffe's like song that he does in Pocahontas to play when Aaron Ra steps out.
Mine. Oh. Let's see.
All right. Well, yeah, my phone's going dead. So you want to get like one more question in?
All right. Dragon King asks, Oye, inspiring philosophy. As you get through the series on Genesis and Exodus, perhaps you'll be doing more. You should respond to all the terrible things that God did and parts that atheists.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'll get to all of that because my goal is to go up through the entire Old Testament and get to all of those issues. It's a big book, so it's gonna take a while.
I think that's good.
Okay. Any? I guess Comrade left.
Yeah, he did.
Any? What?
No, I think he was going to say, do I have any closing questions or something?
No, I'll be on Jackson Wheat's channel this Saturday to talk about evolution, structuralism versus functionalism. So hopefully that'll be a good conversation. Because I don't dislike him, but I think my blog may have upset him a little bit. But I mean, his video kind of upset me. So all's fair in love and war, I guess. So.
Oh well, fun fact. It's actually I actually set this all up basically. Really.
What'd you do?
Well, basically, here's what happened. I wanted to recommend him an evolution video from a Christian, so I linked to him to your video on structuralism, and he said, "Oh, good, I'll check that out." So he checked that out, and then he made that video to you, and then you responded back, and I sent you the video that he made of my suggestion, and now.
Yeah. So thanks. More for me to do, but yeah, no, it's just some of his arguments I thought were misrepresentations, so I had to address it. But hopefully we can come to more agreement on the same level or on the same page. Hopefully, we'll see. But anyway, I'm gonna take off.
All right, it's been HistoryNet interviewing Mike the Inspirer. Share, like, and subscribe to all of us, and see you next time.